everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Scaling People podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am so excited to be chatting with Lorna Hagen. Lorna has made such a tremendous impact in the people space, serving as the CTO for companies like On Deck and iHeartMedia, just to name a few. Most recently, Lorna has actually started her own successful advisory practice called Win Consulting, where she helps organizations optimize their performance of their workforce. She has truly seen it all, and I can't wait to dig into her latest venture. So, Lorna, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh my God, it's my pleasure. It's so good to talk with you, and I'm so glad that we were able to connect in real life. So I'm excited for our conversation.
So much fun. Well, Lorna, kind of going off of some of the stuff we were talking about last week, actually, we're in a time where businesses are facing more financial constraints than they did during the zero interest rate environment, when companies had a little bit more room to invest heavily in culture and in leadership. And so now with tighter budgets, many have pulled back on these investments. But, as you and I have talked about, it's not just a branding exercise to invest in people and culture or to lead with compassion. There's some real ROI in the stuff, which is why in a lot of ways your people strategy is your business strategy. So I figured we could start there and talk about how culture and compassion, while oftentimes they're seen as these soft ideas, how do you tie these directly to hard business metrics and prove that these cultural elements actually drive financial performance?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for this. And again, I'm super happy to be with you. It's interesting, this idea of the times that we're in, and you and I met a lot of people last week in the venture space, and it's remarkable to me how many people are surprised by the idea that money isn't cheap anymore. And because I have a few rings around, the sun, I've seen so many things, right? So I was working when the first .com bust happened. I was working when 9/11 happened. I was working when 2008 happened. And 2008 was a really kind of shocking experience. I bet your parents probably had a house and there was a mortgage, and everyone's like wondering what to do and what happens. And I actually worked at the Wall Street Journal. So imagine being at the hub of financial news when the financial markets are collapsing. And we were in the middle of a giant HR technology transformation at that company. I had inherited a team that was still working on DOS-based systems. And we were doing a massive HRIS implementation globally, as well as putting in, and I'm going to date myself when you guys hear the technology, but it was PeopleSoft and Taleo and SuccessFactors. And so that wasn't cheap for us. And we had to immediately truncate everything that we were doing. And I find that the most innovative ideas always happen when you have a dollar and a dream, right? And so we got really creative in how we did everything. But a big piece of that was, how do we tie all of this into the skills that we're going to need for our leadership going forward? And that was all around culture. And it was around compassion for understanding what people didn't know. And so let me give you a very real example. We were in the midst of people talking about citizen journalism. Like that had just begun to percolate, because the iPhone came out in 2008 and I think the iPad in 2009. And so people were talking about citizen journalism. And we were faced with, what do we do with our journalists? Like, they need to have skills that we don't actually train for today. And so for us, building that culture was the idea of, we need to have omni-channel journalists, not just print journalists and digital journalists. And at the time, the New York Times was saying that they wanted to be agnostic. I didn't want our journalists to be agnostic. I wanted them to be agile. They needed to have facility of all tools. And so for us, it was, how do we actually build a culture around training for those skill sets? I don't have the budget. I can't hire IDEO, right, to come in and reinvent the future of journalism. So we did it ourselves. We did it in-house. We did it by taking the experts of everything and building a brain trust and really thinking about, let's reimagine this organization so that we can actually be the news hub for the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so all of a sudden, because in 2008, we're in a very different spot than 2009, we actually had to work internally, but with the end result being, what is our business strategy? And the business strategy was to be the most highly circulated newspaper in the country. How do
Mm-hmm.
we do that? We have the best journalism, we have the best stories, and we have stories where people are. And people were on Twitter, and people were on Facebook, and people were on video. And so we
Mm-hmm.
had to train our team. And that was all done through the lens of the compassionate thing to do. We don't want to lay these people off. We want to train them to continue to work at our organization. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
build a culture of 21st century digital journalism, and we're going to
Yep.
hit all of our business goals. And so that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you used an L&D example because I actually think that's one of the hardest things to measure real time, and it's often the budget that gets cut the earliest because it's really hard. Like you do a really incredible manager program or maybe, you train your team on a certain set of technical skills and those learnings don't hit overnight, but I think it's a bit of a fool's errand sometimes to try and kind of measure that ROI like over the next quarter or the next half year, but better to really learn from stories like the one that you shared of, if you're in it for the long game, there are certain things that you need to invest in. And if you don't, then the story is, you may not have a business or you'll like significantly lose your competitive advantage. So,
Well, I love
yeah.
that you said that because I often find that I'm coaching. I do a lot of coaching for HR leaders, usually first or second time in role. And the phrase "a fool's errand" is funny, but there is something to being in community and conferences and seeing the shiny bright objects that are happening in our space,
Hmm.
but not tying those to the business results that you want. And so,
Hmm.
for example, these are very analog companies that I'm talking about, the Wall Street Journal and Ann Taylor. But at the Journal, we knew what we needed to do, right? It was circulation. It was also to ship new products. So we developed a magazine, and we had the most successful iPad app with the Wall Street Journal. And it was, we needed to hit $1 billion in revenue for Loft. And
Hmm.
so when you have metrics that are crystal clear to your employees, they want to sign up for that. And what
Hmm.
I find often, and so then, the ability for us as people leaders is to say, well, here's how I'm going to contribute to
Hmm.
that. And I
Hmm.
can make that direct link for you.
Hmm.
So the practice then is in the message. How do you make the direct link? I can link everything that I do to hitting a goal, whether it's a product goal, a financial goal. And my job is to learn how to sell that. Right. So
Hmm.
we don't do enough talking about the idea that your job is a sales job and
Hmm.
influencing is your currency.
Totally, totally. It's all about, like bringing awareness to the impact that some of these things can bring. Kind of shifting or broadening the scope a little bit as we think about culture more holistically. I know as a lot of companies grow, they build these types of rules or norms to reinforce their culture or, core elements of how they work. I've seen Amazon pretty big on this, implementing like the two pizza rule or the memos as they start meetings. And so I'm curious your thoughts on what the right balance is for startups who are starting to build these cultural norms that enable them to do their best work without boxing themselves in too much with this forced bureaucracy. Like when's the right time for that kind of structure and is it necessary?
So the time is at the beginning, and it's absolutely necessary. And here's why I say that. In the begin, and I'm that's so funny. Today I was just coaching an insurtech company on this, which is the job is to ensure that all of your team members, not just HR, everyone at the company understands that the thing that we learned about last week, agility quotient,
Mm-hmm.
is the most important skill set. What that means is change is inevitable, right? Just like taxing your paycheck. Change is inevitable. Don't block yourself into believing that we're going to be static in this way of doing things, in these values, and in this direction. The most successful companies, especially in the smaller VC space, are the ones that realize maybe we had the wrong thesis. Let's pivot. That's
Mm-hmm.
really hard for some people to understand. And so agility is really, really, really critical. And as we're thinking about growing our functions and growing our teams, our companies, how do you actually think about agility as a critical skill set to have? So I'll give you an example. I worked at a company where one of the goals was chaos is good.
Okay.
And it was a mature company. It had come out of bankruptcy. We were still struggling with how to translate, it was very similar. How do we go from analog to digital? And chaos in that environment actually ended up being not as good as we had hoped. The idea was innovation is good.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
translation was try everything, throw spaghetti at the wall. That
Mm-hmm.
actually didn't help anybody. Right. And you can see there's a direct correlation between some of this culture and these values into their
Sure, sure,
financial
sure,
performance.
sure.
Very similar to, here's an example of where they did pivot. Facebook used to have that norm, go fast, break everything, go fast. I don't
Yeah.
remember what it was called, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't do that anymore. Nobody says that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They knew, maybe too late, but still they finally figured out what got us here won't get us there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think employees, especially in very early stage, because they have a personal connection to a founder or a CEO in the leadership team,
Mm-hmm.
they get very lost when that is not the case anymore. And the
Mm-hmm.
leadership doesn't do a good enough job in helping them understand that, hey, I guess we could stay a 3-year-old company forever, but that what that means is that the older kids are going to kick us in the playground, and then we're going to,
Mm-hmm.
stop being viable.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't want your kids to stay 3 years old forever. You'd tear your hair out. So the whole
Sure.
idea is growth and development. And with growth and development, new norms need to be discussed. And so the idea is constantly be talking about your cultural evolution as you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about your business evolution. They
Mm-hmm.
go hand in hand. This goes to the first point. Every Your people strategy and your business strategy, there should be no daylight in
Mm-hmm.
between them. And what
Mm-hmm.
I tell all my clients is every people decision is a business decision. So
Right.
your decision to keep a bad leader is a business decision.
Right.
Your decision to exit them is a business decision. Like that gets lost sometimes because of the emotions of dealing with people.
Mm-hmm.
But figure out a way to be dispassionate about it and really help your employees understand our job is to evolve and to grow.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. As let's say you do implement some of these norms, and despite that, how do you recognize when your culture is slipping or not being lived out as intended? Like, when do you know it's the right time to kind of make that norm shift, or address that sort of culture gap? Are there early warning signs that leaders
Yeah.
should look for before it becomes a larger issue that you've seen crop up in
Yeah.
the past?
One of the things that I really like to say about culture is that culture is what happens when nobody's looking.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke once and at a conference, and Julia, who was on my team, built me this fantastic slide of like the ocean underground, and it was culture is the water, but you
Mm-hmm.
never see the water, right? These fish are
Mm-hmm.
swimming in it, and it's everything that's happening that you can't see, except that people do see it. And this is where I would say to you, C-level listening tours as a rhythm of business tool are really important. Your C-suite should be talking to employees all the time. There should
Mm-hmm.
be intimate settings. There should be safe spaces where employees know, hey, you can bring things up. And what we're doing here is we're collecting themes. We want to know what's happening at the organization outside of an anonymous culture survey. I want to see your emotion. I want to understand your examples. I want to understand how the things that you're telling me are impacting the way that you work. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say that absolutely is something that companies should really think about and implement. The other thing that helped us a lot was we had a suggestion box at On Deck, and it was about business. But once
Mm-hmm.
in a while, someone would send us a note that said, are you guys aware of? And because they knew that we were listening to their ideas about the work and the business, people felt comfortable saying, this feels funny to me. It might, and everyone is very professional. It
Mm-hmm.
might not be a theme, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Mm-hmm.
knew that all went to the leadership team. Chief of staff went to me, CEO. And so there are things that you can do as opposed to relying on a twice or maybe quarterly engagement survey
Mm-hmm.
that really is predicated on somebody's mood in that particular moment to
Mm-hmm.
understand and give employees touch points to leadership where the information will actually, get through the clutter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In your, I know there's, not necessarily, this is always how it happens, but generally when your culture starts, changing or maybe even disintegrating, do you find that a lot of times it's a product of hiring and you're bringing in new voices and new perspectives, or do you feel like it generally comes more from the top where maybe the way that your leadership team is working has kind of shifted? Like, where does it usually come from? And then how do you then adjust the change so that it feels organic and not, forced?
I will always maintain that the buck stops with the CEO, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're actually your chief culture officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
My job is to facilitate and execute. And so the leader and the leadership team, that's where it all starts. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say to you, listen, if you make a hire that guess they dazzled us in the recruiting stage,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work, exit quickly. If you
Sure.
don't make that decision quickly, you're causing a problem, right? So that goes
Mm-hmm.
back to
Mm-hmm.
now you've made a business decision to leave someone in the organization that's actually going to erode your culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would say to you is this is all about clarity and it's
Mm-hmm.
about communication. So one of the things that we learned in one of my roles was that we were not great at communicating. And so we heard it over 3 engagement surveys. Well, guess what? Finally, finally, we listened, and we single our single focus was on comms, and that's when this box came up on business
Mm-hmm.
ideas. We had a beautiful internal comms cadence. Our town halls were, I mean, tight, and we gave people the information that they wanted. Clarity, clarity, clarity. My head of internal comms, my head of investor relations, my head of Marcom met every single month to talk
Mm-hmm.
about what things are happening outside of the business that inside we need to communicate to our employees first. And even
Mm-hmm.
if it's something that's going out to the street and we were a public company, a minute before we sent it out, we made sure that our employees had that information and weren't caught flat-footed with anything, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing, to
Sure.
think, I work at a cool company, they're doing really cool things. They sent out a notification out in the world and I don't know about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
we made sure that all of our touch points of um, clarity, right? So comms were really, really transparent to our employees. The result of clear communication is connection.
Mm-hmm.
Connection is the glue to culture. And so that's what I would think. Yeah, I would recommend to everyone listening. How do you get from clarity to connection to the glue that holds your culture together?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am glad that you brought up the leadership team because I agree. I do think it always starts there. And, I do appreciate that over the last couple decades, at this point, most leaders do understand the connection between culture and business, your people strategy and your business strategy. But that's not always the case. There are, situations where, you find yourself working on a leadership team where maybe your CEO or senior leadership isn't necessarily getting it in terms of the ROI on that culture investment. And so I'm curious, for those that maybe are managing that dynamic, what's your approach to influencing change from the top down when those that are in those seats might not recognize the issue or the importance of the issue and maybe contributing to the problem?
I will give you an idea that's not my original idea, but one of my professors in college, John Boudreau, just wrote something on LinkedIn yesterday, and I have not stopped thinking about it. And it's about Amazon's return to office.
Mm.
I'm not saying that's a bad idea, by the way. For all I know, they do need to be in 5 days a week. But it's how you get to the edict that
Mm-hmm.
I have been thinking about a lot. And what John said was this idea of, listen, if you're making a decision about the customer, and we'll use that specific company as an example, and you decide, we think that our customers, right, the stay-at-home mom and the person who's getting all these boxes every day, they really want more community. Let's stop delivering to homes. Let's just build lots of warehouses. I live out here in Long Island. So it's like, let's build a warehouse in Oceanside and
Mm-hmm.
let's have it open 24 hours a day. And everyone, just instead of us delivering to them, everyone comes to us and you can pick up your package any day, night and day. We just think that emotionally, that's the right thing to do. The board would laugh that leadership team out of the room.
Totally.
There's
Totally.
no data. They have presented a case to upend thousands and millions of lives and their business because they had a gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
This is a company with hundreds of thousands of employees. The employee is also the customer, and
Sure.
they've made a decision without the data, and nobody said anything.
Mm-hmm.
What leadership team gets to say we're making a massive decision based on our feeling?
Mm.
And the data is out there, by the way. There are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of data-driven research that says the opposite.
Right.
It's so hard, though, to sit down and actually say, okay, we have all of these different populations. We
Mm-hmm.
have close to retiree, right? We have 4 generations in the workplace. So we have
Mm-hmm.
these close to retirement people. We have parents. We have single parents, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
who's going to really lose in this?
Right.
Single working mothers are the ones that are
Mm-hmm.
going to lose in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have all these new grads, and we do want them in the office, and we do want to train them, and we do want them to understand our culture and our norms and our behaviors, all of the things that we've talked about. So what do we do, right? It's not everyone is created equal, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone should be treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, that's how I would think about influence with data. If you don't have it, find the information. Like
Mm-hmm.
the and by the way, you have so many tools at your disposal. If you're not an analyst, find somebody at your company. If you don't have
Mm.
anyone at your company, then go talk to ChatGPT and figure out how to use it in an intelligent manner that starts to generate questions for you to ask and
Mm-hmm.
be more curious about what the data is telling you. So there are so many things that you can do, whether you're pulling people or using technology, but data is where you start.
Yeah. Yeah. I think data has always, even when delivering kind of tough news and tough feedback, I find that it depersonalizes the conversation a little bit. I think with some of these things, there's also that element of, what kind of comment are you making about me and my leadership and the way I'm running my company? It becomes, yeah, really layered with that element. So I love that sentiment. Just to kind of wrap things up, I think, kind of going to the top of our conversation with the current macro environment and the tighter budgets that HR teams are navigating. What's the balance between cutting back too much and getting creative to adjust to today's constraints? Like, maybe you don't have as many BPs, or maybe you don't have, a leader for each segment of your people and talent team, or maybe there's like tools and software that you cut back on. But where do you kind of draw the line, and how do you think leaders can be thinking about that?
So let's take it back to the business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that you're in hyper growth mode, you know that right now you're going to invest in TA, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
just the reality. How
Right.
do you formulate an active and a passive recruiting strategy to really help you at the stage where you're at in your business? That doesn't mean don't invest in L&D. It means think about what is the minimum requirement that you need to ensure that your employees are getting something of what they need and start building for the next stage of your company. So
Mm-hmm.
today you're in high growth, talent acquisition focus. Tomorrow you're going to be in a different stage. Companies that actually overspend on L&D are the ones that end up being the most successful financially, right? Companies
Mm-hmm.
that are just recruiting engines do that because their churn
Mm-hmm.
is not what they want it to be.
Sure.
So
Sure.
what you have to do is look at the stage of business, look at what the
Mm-hmm.
goals are of the business, and then focus there. Do not every one of your team, like in the silos of HR and the kind of verticals, again, not all created equal. You do
Mhm.
not have to invest the same amount into everything. And technology is getting so fast and agile. Think about, okay, where can I supplement for now? The other thing is, look at all the networks that you're a part of. I mean,
Mhm.
today I'm still amazed by the level of um, cooperation and openness that people have. Here, take my job ladders, take my comms for the election, take
Mhm.
my compensation bands. Like, everybody is so willing to share, which is, I
Mhm.
love that, because it was not like that when I was, coming up in the world. Use Take advantage, and if you don't have those networks, go find those networks.
Yeah, I love that. I think to your earlier point on thinking about the business strategy, I oftentimes like to build my people and talent roadmap like a product roadmap. And I think lining the two, it's then very clear like these are the things that we're working on. This is the resources that we need. This is when we're going to ship everything. And this is how we're measuring success. And
Yeah.
I think where you can kind of like pull those two things together, that's when you also get more engagement from your other stakeholders on other teams, because they're like, of course, I want to participate in this activity or make sure that my team goes to this training, because that's ultimately going to help us, get our features shipped, our customers more happy, our business more successful. So I love that
There,
notion.
there are there are three things that my business partner and I were talking about today when it comes to the people team influencing. One, there is what the business needs and what they want, and you have alignment there.
Mm.
There are two is what the business needs, but they don't know that they want it. Human capital analytics is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
AI, they don't know that they want it because they can't conceptualize it. So how do
Mm-hmm.
we influence to that? And then there's what the business says they need, but they really don't. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do
Mm-hmm.
you influence to that outcome as well, right? Because sometimes
Right.
we're so quick to say, okay, you want it, you got it, I'll do that.
Sure.
But it doesn't actually move the needle for the enterprise. It just moves the needle for one tiny group.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I would say to chief people officers and leaders in this space is, if you think about it that way, you're able to really figure out where you should be influencing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're in a unique position with Win Consulting and through a lot of the coaching that you do to see a lot of the challenges that are happening at so many different companies. And so I'm just curious, is there a certain theme that emerges that, hey, like every company that I'm working with seems to be, grappling with this exact same problem, or any overarching insights that you
Yeah.
would like to share?
Every company is grappling with employee productivity.
Mm.
Every company is grappling with it because they don't know how to define it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And we see this, I mean, we talk to companies that are 100 employees, we work with companies that are 5,000 employees. So it runs the gamut. Nobody is kind of immune to this issue. And I would say it's because there's so much swirl. There's so much swirl about
Mm-hmm.
the stay at home, the hybrid, there's post-COVID hangover. There's like so much happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that we really like to talk to companies and leadership teams about is, why doesn't engagement resonate with business strategy? And they all
Mm-hmm.
say the same thing. Engagement it's too touchy-feely. It feels like employee happiness. We're not in the business of building employee happiness. And so I don't know what to do with that. And so we like to talk about optimization instead, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for us, that means really understanding how employees understand your strategy. Do they believe in your roadmap for execution? Do they understand the metrics that matter to your organization? And so we start to think about it very differently. And then when we show kind of a comparison of like, here's what optimization and business performance look like compared to engagement and business performance, there's a
Mm-hmm.
huge
Mm-hmm.
mismatch here.
Right,
Whereas
right.
here, people say, that makes sense to me. So an example is, we have a client that has an engagement score of 70%. And the CEO said, I don't believe that how is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
But we gave them an optimization score of 45%. And that same CEO said, that makes sense.
Hmm.
I do believe that only 45% of our company knows where we're trying to go. it opens up a completely different conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, how do you think about productivity? How do you start to make sense of that? And my shameless plug is on our website. We have a calculator. You can start to like really make sense of it for your own company, because whether you have a company of 100 people or 5,000 people, everyone's going through this.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to check that calculator out. I love that point because it really is how those two things come together. Of course, a lot of times engagement does drive productivity, but not always. And sometimes you have a really productive culture and people are, like they're productive for a bit and then they're quitting and then you're, like onboarding new people and constantly kind of running through the churn wheel. And so trying to figure out how to kind of bring those two pieces together, I think
Well,
is
and
life
here's what I
changing.
would say to you, right? A company that has you can have a leader who has highly, highly engaged employees, right? A
Hmm.
super engaged team that are not productive.
Hmm.
You don't want to be there, right? That's an
Right.
inefficient company.
Hmm.
But if you had an optimization score that said, oh, wow, that team is inefficient, now you know that actually the work that you need to do is with the leader of individual contributors. Is
Hmm.
that person translating our strategy, our execution, and our purpose in the right ways and in a way that makes sense to our employees? You can do
Yep.
something so completely different as
Hmm.
opposed to the manager who has a lot of great birthday parties, who celebrates everyone, who is like a font of recognition, but doesn't know how to talk about the business.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it does give you so much more directional insight into exactly, how you may think about addressing the gap to move the needle. But anyways, Lorna, so insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and to share your journey. You just have such a wealth of knowledge and I'm so grateful to have you share that with us
Oh my
today.
God,
So,
my
until next
pleasure.
time. Thank you.
Thank you.